Nashville Design Week is a platform for bold collaborations and conversations that promote idea sharing, engage and educate the public, and strengthen our city's design culture. We shine a spotlight on designers who are shaping the city's future and facilitate critical conversation about the industry's growth and impact.
2020 has challenged us in every way. A tornado, a pandemic, and a long overdue reckoning with racial inequity. And as we close in on a formative election, we are excited to focus on the power of design to reshape communities and to actively support equity. We are proud to introduce a diverse range of speakers covering everything from racial injustice and inequity to diversity and inclusion, connectivity, and allyship, all through the lens of design.
We are fortunate to partner with design leaders who are invested in the future of Nashville's design community. These leaders see Nashville Design Week as essential and support making design discourse accessible to all. Thank you endlessly to our 2020 sponsors for helping us bring Nashville Design Week to life. Thank you to founding silver sponsor, Hastings. Hastings is a boutique architecture and interior design firm of 75 professionals who are deeply committed to the service of clients, producing award-winning, thoughtful, and impactful architecture. Thank you to silver sponsor, Watkins College of Art and O'Moore College of Architecture and Design at Belmont University. The Watkins College of Art and the O'Moore College of Architecture and Design celebrate the power of art and design to transform people, communities, cultures, and the world. Thank you to our copper sponsors, Elevated Outcomes, Interface, Smith G Studio, and Textures Nashville. Thank you to our bronze sponsors, Aberdeen Studio, Alfred Williams & Company, Circa Creative Studios, Dade, EOA Architects, Earl Swenson Associates, Emmanuel Zeitlin Architects.
And thank you to our media partners, Dezeen, Lightning 100, and Nashville Interiors, and to creative directors Lindsay and Alan Lassiter.
Nashville Design Week is proud to be a fiscally sponsored project of the Arts and Business Council of Greater Nashville, a nonprofit organization. Nashville Design Week is an entirely volunteer effort made possible by the tireless dedication of our team. Now, let's get started.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shanice Brown. I'm a volunteer program coordinator with the Nashville Design Week, and I'm also a designer at Tuck Hinton Architecture and Design, and I just want to welcome you all tonight, and we're happy that you're here. On behalf of the Nashville Design Week team, I'd like to welcome you all to Reshaping the Dialogue panel discussion. The hosts for today's program are Katie Lamb and myself, representing Tuck Hinton Architecture and Design and Noma Nash. Reshaping the Dialogue intends to facilitate and amplify the overdue conversations about race and architecture and the associated inequities that are present within the design industry and built environment. We thank you for being a part of the Nashville Design Week 2020. And with that, I'll turn it over to Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Shanice. Also, thank you, Nashville Design Week, for allowing us to host this panel discussion this evening, and thanks again to everyone that has joined. We're unbelievably grateful and excited for this kind of dialogue to happen. But first, we will be starting with a short video discussing the roots of reshaping the dialogue and introducing our panelists.
Reshaping the Dialogue intends to facilitate and amplify the overdue conversation about race and architecture and the associated inequities that are present within the design industry and built environment. After the social media trend #BlackoutTuesday and #AmplifyingMelanated Tuck Hinton wanted to participate. But rather than posting a black square to show solidarity, we took it a step further and began focusing on 5 terms that we felt best outline the inequalities in design. Those 5 topics include injustice, education, recognition, activism, and future. These topics are threaded within the panel conversation, and if you'd like to take a look for yourself, follow us on social media at Tuck Hinton. Katie Lamb and Shanice Brown are recent graduates from the College of Architecture and Design at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where they both actively serve the community in various student organizations. Considering the current social and political climate, we felt hopeless and a need to research and learn about the contributions designers have made towards racism within the profession. With the support of Tuck Hinton and our fiery passion, we began researching how design perpetuates racial injustices, which quickly took shape into a series of social media campaigns and then a panel discussion for Nashville Design Week. Our hope for the future is to continue questioning the profession and design culture, while seeking and contributing in ways of addressing various problematic issues while adjusting our norms. Considering this all began as a social media campaign, we wanted to take it a step further, continuing the conversation about race and design. With this, each of our panelists were chosen due to their knowledge in education, activism, injustice, and future, not to mention their willingness to have hard discussions to better our community. Pascal Sablon, Senior Associate at S9 Architecture. Pascal is the 315th living African American female licensed architect in the United States. She is an architect, mentor, entrepreneur, and advocate to advance architecture for the betterment of society, bringing visibility and voice to the issues concerning minority architects. She is the founder and executive director of Beyond the Built Environment, an organization addressing inequitable disparities in architecture by providing a platform aimed to support numerous stages of the architecture pipeline. Gary Gaston is the CEO of the Civic Design Center and serves as Assistant Professor of Practice at the University of Tennessee Knoxville College of Architecture and Design. Gaston co-authored the book Shaping the Healthy Community, The Nashville Plan, published by Vanderbilt University Press in 2016. He is a TED Nashville Fellow and received the Tau Sigma Delta Honor Society Silver Medal for extraordinary efforts to advance the field of design in the region in 2016. Professionally, DJ Butler is founder and CEO of the nonprofit corporation Nerds Rock, dedicated to redirecting and encouraging higher education and entrepreneurship to inner city youth. Butler is set to graduate in 2021 with his master's in architecture from Syracuse University, and will enter the professional world with focus on using his experience to better the design community. Valerie Franklin is a citizen architect and senior associate at Moody Nolan. She is the founder and acting president of the Nashville chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. Through leadership and service, Valerie strives to continually be an ambassador for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion within the many organizations and boards that she serves on, an agent for change in the architectural and design profession, and voice and sounding board for underserved members of her native Nashville community. Keeping in mind, Reshaping the Dialogue intends to facilitate and amplify the overdue conversation about race and architecture and the associated inequities that are present within the design industry and built environment. We would like to take this time to introduce important terms that will be weaved throughout our discussion this evening. These terms include racism, privilege, gentrification, systemic racism, de facto segregation, de jure segregation, income inequality, racial covenants, redlining, and blockbusting. Throughout the discussion, we encourage you to ask questions in the chat. We have also provided additional information such as handouts, social media links, panelist websites, and marketing sheets in the other tabs. Again, thank you for joining us this evening and welcome to Reshaping the Dialogue.
So with that being said, welcome. We have some really awesome people here tonight to talk about race and design. And I just wanted to reiterate through this video that we will be discussing for about an hour, but we're hoping that you guys will generate questions through the use of the chat. And we will try to leave like 15 to 30 minutes of just answering your guys' questions. Also, over to the right, you see a sticky note, and they have all of our panelists' websites attached, as well as just like, again, a reminder of where you should be asking questions. And if you go over to your handouts, that's where the additional information is for everyone. So thank you. And Shanice, first question.
Awesome. So to kick us off, how do you define racism in design, and what factors contribute, such as location, time, scale, type of design, or even firm size?
Really, I think racism and how it embeds itself in the built environment is also representative in the way of how we're educated about the profession. So a lack of diversity and inclusivity in terms of the contributions of people of color is a very big problem, because not only does it lack representation for the individual who is increasing or bringing into their awareness in the profession, but also their counterparts and peers. And that same issue, it perpetuates in the professional setting. From a built environment standpoint, we often talk about using architecture to eradicate racism and oppression. And a lot of the questions is architecture racist and oppressive? Absolutely. Architecture, the built environment, definitely provides a conversation and energy and messaging through the built work. Right? Those messages can be stay, hang out for a long time. The message could be you need to go right now, but that's also part of the issues. A great example that I love to give is Robert Moses. As you all know, I'm based in New York. And so this was one of the, landscape designers, urban planners that we were taught to elevate and admire, not realizing that part of his history is that he was avid racist and actually really detested Black people and did not want us to participate and actually enjoy some of the public spaces that he had created. And a lot of the locations for those projects that he did in public spaces were really rampant in Black communities that he just decimated with these plans. And one specific example is the Southern State Parkway, where that leads you to the Jones Beach. And understanding that people of color predominantly used buses as their main mode of transportation at the time, he actually mandated that all the overpasses, 20 overpasses in the Southern states to get you to Jones Beach, be designed to be 9 feet at its highest arch and lower. So that would stop from vehicles and buses to be able to access those beaches. So here's how he's leveraging and literally using the built environment to oppress. Right. Then there's other examples such as the Poor Door, when you have developments that take advantage of affordable housing components to give them more FAR or more open space or more lot or funding, and create a beautiful entry with doorman and such that gets to come through with those who are market tenants versus those who are affordable goes through the back door. To me, that is the modern day coloreds only, whites only disparity, and it's disgusting, and it's something that's being practiced, and it's something that we need to be mindful of and understand. The next part of the way racism and oppression is embedded in our built environment is also the way we lack engagement with the communities in which we're designing for. We are not hearing their voices, hearing their concerns, and therefore the built environment is not reflective of that. And that is also our responsibility and our role as design professionals to engage the community in our design process. Because ultimately, no matter what the intentions are, we are not the experts in somebody else's life. And if we're not having those conversations with them, then of course, whatever we design is going to fundamentally fail in achieving what they need to be to address their issues and to support their aspirations moving forward. Great question.
Thanks, Pascal.
And I would also like to take an opportunity to elaborate on some of Pascal's comments, and even from the approach as we talk about the way in which we approach architecture. Many times we hear when we first begin a design conversation, who are we privileging to allow into this space? Who are we privileging to occupy and maneuver and have access into this space? And that key word in which we actually have highlighted as one of our vocabulary words is privilege. But who do we say, okay, we want this to be for this specific society or this specific cultural group? But just by doing so, we unconsciously, sometimes consciously, but I'll, for granted, leave it in an unconscious state, that we unconsciously allow another group to not have that privilege, to not have that access. So I do also believe one of Pascal's points that, when we bring in the community into that built environment conversation, we're producing something new within that community. It's also even more important that our modern day architects really and strongly embrace that idea of let's bring the conversation to the root of who we're actually saying that we're privileging or allowing it, and we want to make sure that it's at the utmost inclusive as possible, to eliminate those individuals that we didn't consider as well.
We also have to look at who are we keeping out. So, DJ said, who are we privileging to let in? Who are we intentionally keeping out? I actually had a friend, she's a restaurant owner here in Nashville. And if you look at the area where Capitol View is, kind of Germantownish, where they're building, it used to be a historically Black neighborhood. And it's getting gentrified now. And there was a billboard in that area. And the billboard said, and this is like kind of subliminal, it said, "You should live here." And on the "You should live here" billboard, it had all white people on the billboard. And this was in historically Black neighborhood. But it said, "You should live here" in Capitol View. She actually went to the city and she petitioned against that sign, and it was taken down, because we have to look at those kind of subliminal, messaging. They do play a part in gentrification and what we do with our built environments.
But it's also even understanding that our built environment and some of the programs that we create harm, right? They do harm, right? It's not just, oh, we forgot to ask you if this was your preference in terms of materiality and program. It's also designing and constructing jails, prisons, and places of detention. That those institutions have an 80% to 100% occupancy requirement. So every time we create these pieces of architecture, we are extracting Black bodies from communities and putting them into a modern day slavery situation. So we need to also understand that it's not just a matter of not great design, but actually architecture that is harming a community and extracting resources and bodies from that community. And then on the alternate side, how, when we do design in those communities, do we capture culture? We have all these concepts about abstract things and about historical moments, but let's also make our built environment reflective culturally of those who are there, the communities there, and then practice design ideas and planning ideas that sustain and move against displacement and gentrification, right? How do you design formulas and your development opportunities to also include the communities that are there that are dealing with this built environment that is currently failing them?
Go ahead, Gary.
Well, one thing I just wanted to reflect on, I've been out of architecture school now for 20 years, and I was just thinking back to my class. There were no minority students in my cohort of my architecture program. And I know that while diversity there have been some strides in the educational diversity in programs, even just meeting Pascal and DJ from the conversations you had about your classes, that is still a very big disparity in the students who are in the education program. So I think now, as who we are as professionals out working in the field, we have to acknowledge that we're a part of a systemic racism in what we're doing in our practice, and we have to look forward and confront that, and also actively take a role in helping change that.
Yes.
According to NCARB, their latest report that came out last year, 65% of African American students who graduate with a degree in architecture come from 7 HBCUs. 7 schools are outputting 65% African American students into the profession with a degree, right? So in a lot of schools of architecture and design, we are one of the class or 2 of the class, or we're not represented. And I think that's part of it, that if we're striving for diversity and inclusion that can only be a product of justice and equity. Why would a student or a child of color want to come into this profession if this profession is a negative thing for their community and for them? So we need to first create justice in the built environment and see and offer their role in how they shape their built environment and the profession. Then they will want to stay in the profession, because once we're here, again, there's a lot of injustice that we have to endure during our education, our professional, and our everyday life, right? So we need to understand that it's not just a matter of pushing diversity, but it's also about sustaining that diversity through justice.
I think this is a perfect segue into our next question, which is how can we confront the current institutional racism embedded within the design community, and what discomforts will be felt as an after effect? What factors contribute to designers to overlook social justices and continue normal practice? So let's continue this conversation. I think this is just a great, we're jumping into it. So let's go.
I mean, one of my favorite examples is the ADA, the American Disability Act, where those who had mobility issues came to the architecture community and asked for us to design with them in mind. And at the time, we're like, nah, we're trying to design really tall buildings and get the cover of magazines. We don't have time for you. And so what they did is they went to City Hall and rolled up to it and climbed on the steps on their forearms and shoulders up the steps to visually protest and show how the built environment is not designed for them and including them. And in doing that, now it's law. And I applaud a community or a group of people who felt oppressed by the built environment, asked for our help, and when they didn't find it, gave us the gut check that we do not own or have authority over the built environment. We are just tools to facilitate its transformation. And that they went over our heads to ensure that they were able to get laws passed to make the built environment do what it needs to do. So now you don't have a choice, you have to mandate. And I start from that position because I think it's important that we not just leverage our position as architects in the work that we do from the day to day, which is very critical, never gonna take anything away from that. But there's also policy and procedures and positions that we can hold that allow us to implement policy that makes it, again, not a choice by institution or by chapter, but something that everyone has to follow as being part of an organization. So leveraging leadership positions, as in being on community boards, to be in the room to say, no, your 7th highway is not gonna cut across this Black community again, right? Also to be board of directors in our local chapters and having them make statements, not just of solidarity, but of action, and holding truth to that action and accountability to that role, as well as dealing with not just us, but government officials, and making sure that, again, we're making policy that makes it a requirement to fight for justice, and not just if it works for you financially. So, and the last person I'll talk about is Beverly Willis, who also leveraged her relationship with her developer friends. And what she did is she asked all of her developer clients not to hire any architecture firm that didn't have a woman in partner or principal level. So now all these firms that were used to getting repeat projects couldn't because they had no women. Guess what they did? They looked for some women in their office, they mentored them and put them in the seats and gave them the tools that they needed to hold equity and to run an office. And I applaud her for recognizing that sometimes when you want the profession to change, you go to the client, because you know everybody jumps when the client says jump. That's why your receptionist is now LEED certified professional, even though she's never going to be doing any LEED checklist, right? So we also understanding that clients have a power here. So part of our education to our clients is letting them know what the issues are and having them demand it from that upper level. And then lastly, diversify our role in the process. We don't always have to be the one who receives the RFPs. We can be part of the developer teams. We can start putting out processes and projects that embed the values that we seek, so that irregardless of who gets the project and gets the funding, the mission of what we want is accomplished in the built environment.
I would, that's great, Pascal. Great information. Great information. It's just like the purpose of this panel is to learn, you know, and I hope everybody is here to learn from the different perspectives that we have on this panel. I would love to take a stab at answering like the first part of your question. How can we confront the current institutional racism embedded in the design community? And to Pascal's point, looking at protests work better in numbers, right? It works better, just me out here picketing, a group of us together is going to work better at protesting. And so I tend to look at from an architectural standpoint, I look at our largest professional organizations, and that would be NOMA and AIA. So as a matter of protest, we should be protesting together and addressing this issue all together. Already in NOMA, we've been at this table. We've been fighting this fight already. And our president, Kimberly Dowdell, she's always admonishing us to what? Be visible. And so at the beginning of the year, she was like, be visible, because we knew all this stuff was already happening. So be visible, be out there, be champions for this. Call it out when you see it. Address it when you see it. Each one of us were, ambassadors in our firms and ambassadors in our cities. And now we've had the opportunity for AIA to kind of, there's awakening there within our American Institute of Architects, our chapters. And I would even go back as far to say some of the statements that we've issued. AIA Tennessee, we've issued Listen, Learn, Acknowledge, Act on our racial disparity statement. And so I want to just take a minute and just kind of pick apart each one of those things. So listen, when somebody comes to speak to you, to tell you about their experiences, actively listen. When I say actively listen, I'm saying, don't sit there and think about a rebuttal that you're going to come, to them with, something that you're going to add to the conversation, because you're not listening. You're writing your own narrative while they're talking. So we really need to be able to listen to people, and then learn. We all have the opportunity to learn. I'm learning right here on this panel, listening to Pascal, listening to DJ, listening to Gary. We all have the ability to learn. And it's not for only us. It's for us to take it to our families. It's for us to take in our work environments. It's for us to take out there to the world. I would say, and then we're not going to know everything. Nobody knows everything, and it's okay to be wrong. And that leads me into the acknowledge part. I've been on several panels, as I'm sure a lot of people that are on this panel have been on panels. And one thing that I've seen, like after the panels, is that I'll get private emails, I'll get private DMs saying, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I didn't know that it was like this. I didn't understand this. I didn't understand that. And to me, that's that acknowledgement phase. It's okay to say that you were wrong or that you didn't understand, because that's how you get to the part to where you can act on it. So, and when you get to that act stage, you've listened, learned, you acknowledged, you've been educated, and you're actually able to take that information into your workplace, into your family, into your community, and come up with some actions. And and then from that, you can look at this panel. Those actions create initiatives, they create programs, you serve, you lead, you're visible. And that's, and that's really, what we all need to work towards. And that's our active way of protesting, I would say.
Yeah, to build on that, Valerie, I think from as a part of an organization or a firm, if you're in a position of power or a leadership role in that entity, is to really take like an evaluation time with yourself and look around you and acknowledge that maybe you're in an environment that does not have diversity in it. And just even that step of really being critically aware of that, and then evaluating what led to that. What are the obstacles or barriers, whether it's explicit or non, that has created that context. And so then you can start to really address that and make some, whether it's policy, hiring practices, how are you reaching out to the diversity in the professional community? What programs are you supporting that will have a long-term impact on increasing diversity, whether it's supporting a school program in a middle school or a high school, or sponsoring an internship through an institution, a college, a practice, recruiting some of the best and brightest right out of school. I think there's so many different levels that firms and organizations can take. And even here at the Design Center, we started to look at the diversity of our board of directors 3 years ago and said, we've got a problem. We really need to be more reflective of our overall community here. And we've made great strides with that. I think where we are is also needing to be much more active on doing that with our staffing positions as well. So it is, I think that's the second part of the question, is that is a discomfort, having even those realizations within yourself, it puts you in a level of discomfort, but we have to do that because we have to realize that we are part of a system. We might not have intentionally planned to be a part of that system, but everybody is. And the only way that we can, as somebody that identifies as an ally to helping or working to support diversity, we have to recognize that and start to work together to rectify that in the future. So I think that having conversations like this, I joined NOMA because I didn't know that I could even would be welcomed into an organization. And so being on a panel discussion with I've been a lot with Valerie the last 6 months, and I learned that. And so I immediately went and joined. And that's just one step that we all as individuals need to start taking.
And I'd like to share a point as well. And first, to piggyback off of one of Valerie's points, and I want to share this because it was enlightening to me when I heard, but in the word listen, there's a word also within the word listen, and it's silent. You must silence yourself in order to listen to another person adequately enough, effectively enough to then respond in the way in which they need. So that's the first thing that I want to share. And then to my point, and to ask the question on, how can we confront the current institutional racism embedded within this design community? I like to share it, it's symbolic in this moment of coming together. And I want to continue to encourage that idea. And this is something that actually at Syracuse Architecture, this is something how we rallied around NOMA. And our Syracuse NOMA alumni who are so amazing. If they're here, I definitely I always give them a shout out and a kudos for paving the way at Syracuse Architecture. And collectively, they've come together to do some dynamic things to respond to the kind of institutional racism that's embedded within Syracuse. And while a lot of it has been acknowledged, it didn't happen because one person said something or a second person said something. It was a collective group that had gotten to a point in which we were like, hey, look, this is what we want to do. The alumni rallied around the current Syracuse NOMA's group. And it was like, hey, look, we have a group of students in here and we have a group of professionals out here, and we're all trying to do A, B, and C. And slowly but surely, we started to carve away at some of those embedded systematics that created the kind of atmosphere that Syracuse Architecture once had. And we see, especially in this academic year, how so much of that has now been removed back, and students are getting a different. And I was still learning about what our first years are gaining in the midst of this kind of pandemic situation. We all wish it was different, especially in a first year in an academic architectural environment. But nonetheless, the landscape in which Syracuse Architecture engages now is definitely more unbiased. It's definitely more integrated into the design community in which we want to see it grow and continue to flourish. And being in the midst of those spaces, it's hard to see because it's virtual, but none together, you do see those collectives coming together to create something new. So I want to encourage, this and this continuous collaboration, of different perspectives, and it doesn't matter about the differences. It's actually those differences that bring the inclusivity that we're seeking. So I'll share that moment.
And I think that's a great kind of segue to 1968, where Whitney M. Young gave the keynote at the AIA conference and basically put us on notice and said, you all are great on giving each other awards and pats on the back, but you're completely irrelevant for the fight for civil rights and justice, right? And 12 people who were in that audience and heard that message became the 12 founders of NOMA, right? And so what I wanted to just echo really quickly is that you have the power and the capacity as an individual and as a collective to fight to dismantle injustice. I don't want you to feel like you have to be this $1,000 billion-dollar company to be able to have impact. An individual, a group of individuals, echoing what DJ said, can get together and create something and form something that allows for that opportunity and for that mission to move forward. So, really staying open to conversations, being open to the critique to see how we can do better, and really feeling empowered to do that work, even from an individual standpoint, is really important to serve and to fight for justice.
Well, I guess I kind of want to go back to the topic of discomfort and just open up the table and ask, just in general, have you all experienced discrimination in the workplace or in your educational space? And I guess along the lines of what Valerie was sharing with us when stating listen, learn, acknowledge, and take action, what are some other things that you guys can suggest? Or how do both parties learn and move forward in bettering firm culture when it comes to that?
Y'all are shy. I'm gonna jump in. Okay.
I can hop in there.
Okay. So quickly, in terms of experiencing racism, it's a story that I share often, which is when I was in my first year of School of Architecture, professor walked in and asked me and another student to stand. And we were told that we would never become architects because we were Black and because we were women. And I remember in that moment feeling like just shocked that the professor would just make such a claim without knowing my name, my capacity. Frankly, at that point, it was so early in the game, I didn't know what my capacity was. 2, that in this room of 70 students, only 2 of us fit the damn criteria. So that was like another thing, like, oh, all right, found a new best friend. 3, kind of seeing my peers kind of jot it down like it was going to be on a quiz or something, but just understanding the power of the professors in terms of the education, the conversations, and what they teach us, and how much we absorb it as pure facts. And when I talk about this, when I do a lot of my public speaking, I actually pause and ask the audience to stand if they've ever been told they couldn't because of their gender and race. And people are standing a lot in schools of architecture, at conferences. It is not something that just happened to me. It gave me purpose, so I'll take it for what it was, but it's not an isolated issue or incident. So I think it's really important that that's part of the dismantling of the injustice, is recognizing that there's sensitivity trainings and real ramifications that need to go down when in places of power, whether that be in the office and or in schools, when somebody's offering that kind of racism so bluntly and flagrantly. In terms of firm culture, honestly, as long as I do my work, show my work ethic and my talents, I have not experienced racism to me directly that I am aware of. However, I will say, as being one of the few diverse professionals in my company and in my past firms, is that the work of fighting for DEI has often fallen to me. And that's also not correct either, right? And I sometimes take the position of, I'd rather do the work and have my firm stand up and take a position on things. But honestly, the work of making an office in a firm more equitable and just should not keep being fallen on the shoulders of those who are being disenfranchised. So if you are in a leadership position at your firm, you need to understand that you need to show up for those employees and for the community that you're impacting. So those are the 2 kind of scenarios of how I see the load and the weight of being a woman and a person of color being thrown in my face as something of what I couldn't do, as well as an extra weight that is part of my philanthropic experiences where I'm doing this for free or what. So I always ask, what's the P code? What am I putting into Del Tech for this hour, for this committee, for this conversation? How are you valuing it? And I think that's important for us to echo here.
Yeah, and it literally makes my skin crawl when I hear people say that institutional and systemic racism does not exist. Because you frame you frame the question around we all represent on this panel workplaces and educational spaces, but I, as many Black people, have experienced discrimination in life, period, and it literally touches every part of our existence: housing, education, healthcare, career choices, career fields. Um, and so when you talk about this question, you have to kind of lay the foundation of the getting and the giving of racism. Because I literally started getting racism in elementary school, in kindergarten, on the way walking to school, being bullied and called N-word, on the way to school. And then, from there, middle school, there was race wars, in my middle school and high school, just because some Black kid got in a fight with a white kid. Now it's the Black people against the white people. And I had nothing to do with it, but I felt like I had to protect myself and make makeshift weapons and bring those to school to protect myself from some racism that I didn't even garner it. Then early in my career, my first job, I walk in on my boss making a statement that if we lost this job, it would be worse than his daughter running off with a Black guy. And I heard that. and he just he just flushed, and then spent the rest of my time there trying to convince me that he wasn't a bigot, which my time wasn't long after that. And then to just walking down the street exercising and a truck pulling up throwing fountain drinks out at you, calling you an N-word. Then to inside the profession, in a professional environment, in a professional event, someone at the event coming up to you saying, "Oh, it's two of you here," referring to Black architects. Then going to an after hours event for Black, not for Black, but for women architects. And I get to the front door, and instead of asking me to sign the guest list, they say, we're closed. This is an event for architects. Just assuming that I was not one. So, it's touches a lot of aspects of our life. So when people say that it doesn't exist, it's really just kind of slap in the face, that it does not exist, because it's happened to us. And I always go back to the tree falling in the forest analogy. If a tree falls in the forest and you're not there, that doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. Wherever that tree is falling, you got people running for cover, trying to get away from the tree. Some people even crushed by the tree. But you don't know that happens, if you're not there. So I just want to drive that point home, that because there's still people out there that think that it doesn't happen because it hasn't happened to them. And then in our profession, we have evidence of it happening, especially as a Black woman. Number one, as a woman, you're faced with sexism. And it's just proven, with the dollar. Women make 80 cents on the dollar of what white males make. And then you have Black women that make 63 cents on the dollar of what white males make, because we're hit with the double whammy of sexism and racism. And that is just proof of what's happening. And then, all of those factors, everything that goes along, in our lives, and things that happen to us at work, it adds to that. And I just learned this recently. and I want everybody to write it down and go Google it, but allostatic load. Allostatic load is it's a low grade, it is a low grade stress that is always there, and it affects you physiologically, your physical and your mental, and it's really what leads to a lot of disparities. I guess you would say a lot of underlying conditions such as high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes. It's a lot that and then of course mental illnesses and things like that. So to say that it does not exist, I think that's one thing that we have to understand, first of all, that it does exist, because if you don't understand that it exists, you can't do anything to fix it. So it really falls back again on that acknowledgement that I was talking about earlier, because we could say, all of us on this panel, we have stories that we have to tell, just like Pascal told her story. But these are things that are really happening. And it's not just for us to just regurgitate these things. It's for you to listen and take it in and have aha moment that, oh, it actually happens. And it's not going to stop until we get to the point to where we can say, okay, this is happening. This is how we address it. And these are the things that we're going to put in place to combat it.
And I'll take a moment here to share experience coming out of, well, I'm at Syracuse now, but my place of love is definitely Nashville. And I was just graduating from TSU, HBCU alum, fresh into the world from an architectural engineering degree at the time. And I found myself working for a small engineering firm. They allowed me to do some independent contractor work for them. And I found myself actually out in Smyrna representing a client, code counsel, trying to get a project through development. And prior to, I had learned of the history that was occurring with this client. And as this project continued to move forward, everything was okay. And at the exact moment where I'm now alongside this client and representing his project to get it through, there was an immediate dismissal before we even get to approach the bench and let them know the updates that have been made to the design going forward. I know we were to acknowledge some requirements, in which we did, but the fact that we didn't even get the chance and opportunity to do so, and in that dismissal, and if working with code counsels, you meet pretty much on that docket, you get pretty much that first month, and to have this meeting, and if you don't, you have to wait the next month to get that project up to whatever standards that the code counsel is asking for them to be met. But that lag for 2 months before we could even get an acknowledgement at the docket, and at the second time, one of the officers came out and he spoke with the engineer that I was working alongside with, whom was repping the design, who was representing the client. And it came out, he apologized, not on just his behalf, but he understood that the way in which the atmosphere shifted when the docket came to our time slot to present the changes and updates that had been made to the project, that we were definitely not being acknowledged to even present them, which was now causing our client to be in this position. That's not the client's fault, and it's not the firm's fault either, but it's a part of this kind of systematic understanding of just, well, now the representation on the team is different, and we were being treated unfairly because of that difference that I was now a part of. And finding that, I'm outside of my HBCU bubble. I'm in the real world. I'm in the profession now, and I'm an entrepreneur at heart as well. I'm getting this first experience, and it was a wow moment. I really couldn't believe how that first experience kind of shifted and redirected my approach and how to maneuver in racial systematic circumstances. But it taught me a lot, and I was so thankful that I was able to have Chet Rose Engineering. I was able to have a guy like him who was white male nonetheless, out of West Virginia. But he said, "Hey, DJ, look, I'm sorry that this has to be your kind of first experience, but I'm going to continue to, put you out there, let you get that experience." And he understood that I was more than willing to do so, because I knew if this experience isn't trailblazed, and I decided, well, I don't want to do this anymore. It's not successful. It's hurting the client, and there's a bigger picture working. Then I begin to do a slow injustice of those that want to come forward. There's a boldness and there's a level of thick skin that we as people of color have to have. I only ask that it's not received from our counterparts as us being aggressive or boisterous, but we're just, hey, looks like, hey, look, I have factual information and education, etc., to prove why such and such should happen and go forward. And that's the kind of accountability that we actually ask for. So I'm thankful that I was able to have that experience, despite the kind of challenge that it brought.
Just as a normative thing, I think, being white, they dismiss racism because they don't say the N-word or they don't do violent acts. And I do ask or wonder what you felt in microaggressions. I feel like this is a relatively new term. And I feel like the connection between what we say and how it's not misconstrued, but how it's felt is completely disconnected. We don't feel like we're racist because we don't say the N-word, but we do racist microaggression things. So I wonder if you could call or kind of talk about that a little bit, as well as just, I think back to what Valerie stated of just the implications that are felt through the toll of experiencing racism. How do we as allies help you guys through this? So that's just to piggyback off of this conversation.
So I could continue and elaborate from another experience that I actually had at Syracuse. And I brought this conversation straight to my dean, Dean Speaks, who's a great guy. I've appreciated just the learning that I've gained from him, but he also allowed me to critique him in a moment to where last year, we found our campus before the Black Lives Matter movement really blew up over the summer. Syracuse University was in at hashtag not again SU, racial slurs all across campus, etc. And there was all of these acts happening on campus. Nonetheless, our Slocum Syracuse Architecture School was in this bubble, completely protected from everything that was going on outside of our immediate walls, which ultimately led to a day where there was a manifesto released on campus, and that literally said National Guard, there, all kind of federal troops on campus, etc. And in this moment, our school is giving this kind of discussion on what has happened and how to let's calm everything down, and this is the critique that I gave, and I openly shared that you have to say what it is, say the thing that you don't want to say is actually the thing that needs to be said. And it wasn't in that moment, there was a white supremacist manifesto on campus, but instead of saying what it is, because there are students who know what that is, and there are students who don't know what that is. There are students who don't know how to process that information. There are students that do. But in that moment, I spoke with them, sometime after, actually. It was the heat of the moment. I choose not to speak in the heat of certain moments. You never know what you're going to say. But nonetheless, I spoke with him. I said, Dean, because of the fact that there was something at that severity happening on your campus, the politically correct, and I really dislike political correctness, especially in certain environments where there's a need to just be real. But you did a disservice by telling students that there was just a PDF floating around campus when I send PDFs every day. I send PDF. KT sent me a PDF this morning telling me about the questions. Like, what PDF? But a white supremacist manifesto saying, specifically outlining the dominance of the white population to continue to go forward. So there will be some kind of killing, etc., to happen on campus. That's a totally different thing than a PDF. You know, so the thing that we definitely ask, that I ask, while I speak for myself here, is the truth, just the honest, raw. I know you don't want to feel like you're in a racist place or a racist state, or, you know. And Gary brought up the fact of, hey, look, there's a part of ownership that white people in America must take on. It's not you, but it's the society that we're trying to figure out. Well, who can we trust? Who can we? But if you're real with us, it's like, okay, I appreciate you so much just for being just honest and real. It's not, I'm not taking you as a racist for just saying what it is. I mean, obviously, don't call me a N-word. I wouldn't tell you that. But you can say the hard truths and the real truths, and then we begin a real conversation that's not filtered by political correctness. That I appreciate that so much. So that's my piece.
Yeah. We are in the information age, and unfortunately, there is so much opportunity for misinformation because we are in the information age. And, you know, a lot of it's proliferated by the sharing, retweeting, reposting memes and everything that you really haven't had the opportunity to research or fact check on. I would encourage everybody here, everybody listening, to listen to a wide variety of media outlets. Just don't stick to one. I mean, you may think that, I watch them all. I watch CNN, I watch Fox, I watch MSNBC, just to be able to gauge the information that people are getting, and to be able to kind of pick and choose and be able to verify the truth yourself, instead of being spoon-fed what someone is telling you the truth is. And I think that because we have those media outlets, a lot of times we just kind of lean on them and just, well, I'm going to listen to everything that they say, and it's going to be true, without using fact checking yourself and making sure that the information that you're getting is the truth. And then sometimes the best way to get the truth is just to talk to someone that's going through it instead of just relying on a media outlet or on a report or on a meme or something like that. We have to get to that point to where we're making this personal, and we are humanizing these discussions. And one way to do that is to, like you guys are doing here, you're attending this panel, and that's why we're having a lot of these panel discussions, and it is to humanize the whole thing, and we have to do that.
And then I think one of the biggest kind of microaggression that I get is when I get write-ups and like, oh, this articulate Pascal, and I'm like, I mean, sure. I don't know why we were surprised, but I'm articulate. But I think just kind of these describers of me and our education, and is always kind of interesting to see what is kind of elevated in kind of descriptions of me that seems kind of just typical. But really, what I wanted to piggyback off of what Valerie said is the idea of what truth is, right? And then kind of piggybacking what DJ was talking about in terms of activism and fighting for truth and honor, and in terms of claiming what is truth in the moment, what is the harsh, discomforting, uncomfortable conversations that we are just talking about. And I think that came back from Shanice's question about our discomfort, right? And I'm really resentful to the sensitivity of people's comfort or discomfort, because I'm in a constant state of discomfort. So to say, I know you don't want to have this uncomfortable conversation, almost is as if I'm asking for permission to have an honest conversation with you about something that is directly impacting my life, my child's life, my family, my kin, my community, right? And so I think that also goes to the heart of this request for these really minor baby steps of progress. And I think that should not be the expectation anymore, because the patience is no longer there, right? It's not just a matter of asking for lunch and learns and pretty pleases for these small, justices. No, we want to eradicate racism and oppression. That is the ask, right? Not things that are going to keep you comfortable and warm and fuzzy, right? And then when we talk about truth, I think architecture itself holds truth. There's a building that I called affectionately the Lynching Museum, but it's the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Alabama, where they have pieces of metal inscribed with people's names, location, and dates in which they were lynched. And there was such protest against this project because people were asking, why do we want to emphasize such a dark past? And the first thing that I talk about when I talk about this project is what past? People are being hung from trees and are being lynched every day. And George Floyd was lynched in modern day, right? People are being lynched all the time. And so if you are uncomfortable with the history, it's important that the architecture starts to keep that history. Because if metal hanging from a ceiling makes you uncomfortable, then I need that same energy when Black bodies are swinging from trees as well. And I give an example of an 8-year-old in New Hampshire who was hung by these high school students who thought it was funny in front of his 11-year-old sister, who was able to get him down in time and save his life. But seeing the rope burns around this baby's neck and seeing law enforcement say they refused to press charges because there were good high school kids and that wasn't their intention is part of the racism and oppression that we're saying that is expressing and explaining to you the urgency of the call for justice, right? And I think it's important at our role as architects to make architecture keep history and keep truth, in fact, in there. Because as you all know, many textbooks are being rewritten to remove the word slavery and be replaced with unpaid labor or volunteers during chores, right? There are states that don't even require the mention of slavery at all in textbooks, that civil rights, state rights is what is being taught was the reason for the Civil War, right? And so our books are being written in a way that it's erasing our history, and it's erasing our prominence, and it's erasing our purpose. And so in the fight for truth, it's important that we capture the truth. We write the books, we create materials, we create the built environment that maintains that truth, because there is a force of erasure that is relentless about erasing things that make people uncomfortable. So the word uncomfortable in a lot of ways is a huge trigger for me, because so much policy, people, positions have been strategized around people's comfort and not about people's survival and the right to the basic human rights that we all yearn for.
So I just want to bring up something to think about, since we're having that uncomfortable talk about lynching. So there were anti-lynching laws put on the books. Think about that for a minute. If you have to write anti-lynching laws, that means what? That means lynching was legal. So back on my systemic racism point, I don't see how anyone could think that having these racist laws on the books to where we had to eradicate them with other laws does not constitute that something is wrong institutionally. And as Pascal said, it's still going on today, just in a different form. So that's all I want to say, since we're having that uncomfortable conversation, just to give you all something to think about, to just take that nugget and just think about it.
No, not just think about it, do something about it. No, y'all. The purpose of this is to push for action. Whatever the action that you can do is what we need. But no more thinking. Enough thinking. Action.
Y'all heard the lady.
Well, so I want to jump in here too, also to refer back to one of the vocabulary words of privilege. And when you're asking about if we'd all experienced discrimination in any way, I was thinking back, and I can honestly say no. And so that is a privilege that I've experienced. And I think from that word, everybody who needs and wants to be an ally, you have to consider that. What we've been given just because we were born with the color of our skin, or what we have not received through that process. And I think it's the utmost expression of privilege for someone to say that systemic racism doesn't exist, right? Because they're outside of that experience. And so I think that first really go into the discomfortableness and identify that. Acknowledge it, claim it, and then use it to move forward, work with groups and harness that privilege that you may have, but also do it in a way that you truly have those conversations, understand. You just can't rush out and be like the savior complex. Really, we work with the community that's identified what needs to happen and support and raise those voices and financially outmarching every single thing you can do.
And one great action to do is really, and it goes back to what I was talking about, the anti-lynching laws, is dismantling those things that are in place that are barriers. You can dismantle those. That's the first thing you can do. If you have a glass ceiling in your firm, and there's a glass ceiling, and people are being put on boards or in positions because people like them or because they just want them there, create some ground rules saying, hey, you have to check this, and that box in order to get here. That way, people have some goals to work towards. And when they check all these boxes, they can say, hey, I check all these boxes. Why didn't I get the position?
And I'd like to also hop aboard the uncomfortability train. And I really like how Pascal, really phrased it. My life is, it revolves around uncomfortability. A lot of it is uncomfortable, but I embrace it in the most ways because of what I've learned in my own experience is that uncomfortability is the single most thing that has produced so much growth in my life. And just learning how to, not only acknowledge, but embrace it for what it is, as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to grow and develop just as a person, not just as a Black man, but as a person, as a global citizen, all the more. Uncomfortability has never failed in that aspect. And when I open-mindedly see uncomfortability and I find myself in that space, it forces me to kind of let me dial back, and internalize what's happening. Let me process what's happening in this space that's actually causing, the uncomfortability. And I challenge everybody who's in this discussion, who's listening, when you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation, ask yourself, why is that making me uncomfortable? Try to get to the root of it for yourself. And as you ask yourself that, slowly start to put the pieces of the puzzles that haven't been there, that you haven't acknowledged before. Start bringing them into, oh, okay, this is why I'm like this, or this is why this. And as you do that, then re-engage it in a way to now try to help someone else, because you overcome something that so many people try not to understand, and that's uncomfortability. So I'll leave that there.
I guess a personal question that I want to ask you guys. So as an advocate, when you are acting as an advocate, how do you guys, so you don't want to get burnt out, right? So how do you all gain support, and how do you all seek your allies? But in this scenario, like for instance, Mr. Gary approached Noma Nash and stated that he wanted to be an ally. But what if you aren't getting that support, or what if people aren't coming to you? What does that look like? And then also I want to ask, if you're not feeling support from where you're at, whether that's your place of work or the school that you're at, how do you seek it, or how do you begin that conversation with your higher ups?
I can speak to the burnout. Some the burnout is real, and I would say that we're all due to COVID, due to the racial injustice, due to the election, due to our political climate. We're all at some level of burnout. We're already kind of teeter-tottering with things affecting us mentally. So we keeping all that in perspective, and I'm just going to be real, because people are really struggling with mentally right now. You have to take those moments for yourself and just disengage. There are going to be times where you're just like, I'm turning everything off. I'm just gonna do things that make me happy, because it's people out there. I had an ex-worker. People are really struggling right now. Suicide is real. So we do have to take those points and say, hey, I'm gonna disengage. Lynn, I see Lynn in the chat box. Lynn is always on me. Lynn Jolly is always on me about getting burnt out. So I know, but at the same time, you want to make yourself available. You want to make yourself available as part of the solution. But I'm learning, and I think it's a real learning process to be able to say, no, I can't do this, or here's somebody else that can do this too, and not disengage. So I would say don't totally disengage without giving some direction, and I think that's what we can do as servant leaders. We can lean on others more than we've leaned on ourselves. To lean on ourselves as much, because I think really, and I'm going to speak to myself as a Black woman, we lean on ourselves a lot, and we don't take help well, and that's because we feel like we should be doing it all ourselves, and we should be handling our family. We should be handling things at work. At work, we have to be 10 times as good, So it's a lot of that allostatic pressure, that that chronic stress that we're kind of carrying around. So finding times, and I'm just speaking to everybody out there because I know everybody's stressed out. Find those times where you could just offload it and put it to the side. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to Panama Beach. It's like, I'm going to Panama City and I'm just going to leave everything. So it's just take those times for yourself, but don't disengage. If you remove yourself, try to find, someone to stand in, and it was kind of like we lean on each other. But we still stay in this fight, and then we find allies like Gary Gaston. Because it's not gonna be just us in this fight. It's gonna be everybody. Everybody needs to get in the fight. So, if you have a Jedi committee, which is me, Yolanda. Now that's Lynn. but when you have like these Jedi committees, they don't always have to have a brown skin or a brown face. They can look like who we want to serve. And that means it's going to be a group that's diverse. And don't wait for us to lead. Don't wait for us to lead. If you want to start an initiative, start it. Don't say, well, I can't start this initiative because I don't have anybody Black here. You start it, and then you search. Like Pascal said, you find them. You find them. You go out there, you find them. And then, like the comment that Pascal made about the HBCUs, all the grads coming from HBCUs, we have a real problem with recruitment at HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. That's where a lot of these architectural candidates are graduating from, but we have a real problem with recruitment at these schools. So look at the pots that you're looking in. If you're in Alabama, don't just look at Auburn, look at Tuskegee too. Putting a little plug in for my alma mater, I'm just saying. So we have to lean on each other in this fight. That's what I'm saying. Offload some of the work to others, to allies.
So first I would say is you're entering into a community of support, right? And so before we kind of start off thinking that we need to found our own organizations and such, it's getting involved, it's being part of that collective service of volunteering. So you want to get involved with AIA, with NOMA, that are organizations that are already doing the work to start to get familiar with what the issues are, understanding who the key characters of progress and oppression are, to understand really the true dynamics of what's happening. And from that position of serving, of volunteering, then you might start to realize gaps and interstitial spaces of where that overlap isn't kind of being addressed. And that's when you create your new program. That's when you create your new resource, because we also don't want everything to be flooded. But in volunteering, you are creating this coalition of like-minded, equally passionate troublemakers, right? That are doing the work in their different niches and capacities, which has been mind-blowing for me. So NOMA has been my first plug in terms of finding other advocate architects. AIA grassroots conferences blew my mind to understand how many people are out there who formed business models from cultures around these issues. Being part of the Design Justice Summit, being part of the planning committees from there, and identifying 24 design professionals around the world globally doing this work was another way of creating and building that community and that coalition. So I disagree, Valerie. I am definitely not trying to do all of it by myself. I got no problem saying, help me please. And I do it often. And I feel when I am overwhelmed or flooded or need more strategic thinking or a policy shift, I leverage the network and the communities that have been building through all this volunteering work. The other way that I build my coalition or my community is when I do my public speaking, I don't only speak about what I've accomplished, but I talk about what I'm aspiring to do as well. Because you never know who in the audience is part of your support system that can make your dream become a reality, right? And so it's critical that we don't wait till we're 1,000 years old and that we've accomplished everything ever to even start talking about what we're trying to do. It's important that we engage everyone in that process, in that element. I also am a mission-focused centered person. So every request to be on a board, every request to be on a panel, conversations, positions, firms, whatever, it has to filter through the lens of fighting for justice. And if it really does not move that needle forward, I have no qualm saying, no, thank you, I is not the one for this particular endeavor. However, here are a list of people that I think you should be in communication with. Lastly, the other way that I get rejuvenated by the work is by making progress, right? I put in place and programming and initiatives that actually address the things that I'm fighting. And each time I make a new exhibition or get a policy in place, that helps me build that support that keeps me moving forward. So for instance, with the Say It Loud exhibitions, I've now curated 15 exhibitions with another 6 being planned for the end of this year and next year. That platform is about cultivating and elevating women and diverse designers of each specific location. I have found people of color and women doing amazing architecture that I don't see in the press. When you look in magazines, you would think architects only live in New York or in California. Hello, there's a lot of space and built environment in between them, and the work is phenomenal. And the issue is they're not being elevated. So that addresses this idea that, oh, we don't exist. No, we here, and you've been enjoying our fruits of our labors for a really long time. Then I said, all right, Google, why is it when I Google the words great architects, only 50 white men show up with one woman, Zaha Hadid? Why is that happening? Pascal, there's not enough content that lists you all as great. Okay, so I started the Great Diverse Designers Library, where I'm elevating those people from those exhibitions in a public platform where you all have the opportunity to see their work, see their faces, and hear their voices. I also speak to media applications and have them take an MOU requiring them to audit the amount of women and diverse designers they feature in their publication and commit to increasing that percentage by 5% annually until 15% at a minimum is reached. Because not just about us putting ourselves out there, but them amplifying and echoing the great work also. So again, and currently working on the textbook, actually publishing the book that explains and elevates these amazing people that I've gathered from all this work. So I say all this to say each increment, each step forward in fighting for justice gives me power in continuing the fight. And knowing full well when it is no longer within my capacity and having a trustworthy network that I'm able to leverage and request help and support, and they show up the same way that I show up for them when they ask for help. Oh, and lastly, Noma Foundation Fellowship has now allowed for firms to get students from HBCUs and schools of architecture to be able to place them in places of employment so that they're getting the same opportunities to really be leveraged into these big companies and to small firms across the world so that we, again, can cultivate these really beautiful and talented individuals. Okay, sorry, bye.
Shanice, I wanted to just say, you're probably I think the only person in the world that calls me Mr. Gary. And that's because I've known you since you're in the 10th grade. And I think in my own life, I recognize the tremendous, many ways that I've reached the point where I am is because I had wonderful mentors who really believed in me and challenged me to be the best I could be and always think forward and work really hard. And so it's just an ultimate pleasure to be able to, I think it's invigorating to go out and accomplish that, but also to understand the responsibility that you have in becoming a mentor for others. And I would just say from my personal standpoint, I'm just so incredibly astonished at your progress since I've known you for many years now. And I think that, one of the things I'm really excited about is the way that we got to know each other through our educational program, Design Your Neighborhood, going from just a summer program with a small number of students to now being in 25 plus metro Nashville middle schools with, several thousand students participating in that program in 7th and 8th grade. I think that's a wonderful way to start to engage students and kids at a younger age so that they can learn about design and really be captivated by it and have that energy and exploration and the wonderful things that thinking creatively and design can inspire in our youth and students. And so I would say, from your perspective of where you are now is and the way that other professionals, young professionals in this group, in this room, but across the city can also become engaged as mentors through that type of educational experience to share their stories and to show kids in our schools that they can, that there are people for them to look up to and follow in those footsteps and share their stories about what they've gone through, but also the inspirational side of it. So I think there's a balance. We always have to, we're going in a direction and we've been pushed forward, but also it's really invigorating and exciting and fulfills us when we get to that point to also look back and help the next generation.
Speaking of generations, that's the beauty of this panel. And that's the beauty. See, Pascal doesn't disagree with me. She's just different than I am. She's a different generation than I am. And the generation she is, they're empowered, and we're learning. We're actually learning from them. That it's okay to say no, and it's okay to let go. So and I'm learning from my daughters. I have a 26-year-old daughter, and she's the same way. And I'm just like, wow, how'd y'all get this way? I was like, this is great. So So there is hope, and if you look at our panel, and we have differences in opinions, and we have different ways of getting to places. This is what you need in your firm. This is what you need in your office. This is what you need on your board of directors, so that you can get these differences of opinions and create better programs and policies. I'm done.
Well, thank you all. We have 5 minutes left, and we had a few questions come in, and we just wanted to maybe ask one, if you guys don't mind, before we wrap up. But this question is from Asia. It states or asks, as a young minority architect in a very large firm that does not hold a senior leadership position, what steps or actions can be taken to hold my company accountable to following through with their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to culture and practice?
So I'll say this. I've started or created diversity and inclusion committees at my firms to start the conversation and to start building a community in the firm that starts to speak to those issues. I've created requests from my company leadership to then also start to create action items and invest in those components that we've arrived to together in those policy and committee work. However, there are some firms who are simply not interested, simply do not see the benefit of doing this work. And it's important that you don't also, Asia, kind of beat your head against the wall trying to get people to see the value in what you're saying. If the value is not there, there are organizations and groups such as AIA, such as NOMA, that see the value, and that your energy and what you want is something that they would actually move forward and put action in. There's oftentimes people say we have to have a seat at the table, but if I'm the one on the menu, I don't need to be at that table, right? There's another table where I can actually do work, where we're strategizing and putting things down. So I think it's first important to give your office the opportunity to step up in that role and let them know where they're failing you. Create committees so that you have, it's not just your voice, but voice of the collective. And if you really are seeing that voice that is being offered with reasonable and unreasonable requests of fighting for justice are not being met with the same rigor and vigor that they would in other capacities, then honestly, I would move that energy into a place that actually fights for progress.
I would say that's a great answer, Pascal. And just to expand on that, I would say challenge policies. Challenge the policies that are in place already, because if there's no minority leadership at the top, there's something preventing them in the pipeline from getting there. So challenge those policies. If you don't know how promotions are being given, and a lot of time promotions are given to friends and people that they like, challenge those policies. Get something like in writing saying this is how promotions are given, so that when they are given, and if they don't line up with the people that they're given to, then there's something to point at and say, hey, I was just as qualified for this, and I did this, and that, and why didn't I get it? And if the only reason that you didn't get it is because of the color of your skin, then that's a problem. So I say every firm needs to identify how. And if you're in leadership at a firm and you're listening to this, you need to identify how your promotions are given and what the basis is. And you need to communicate that to the people that work for you, because they need something to aspire to. And they need to know that it is real and that it could really happen. So that's the bit of advice that I would get. And that's what we shouldn't have glass ceilings. They should be shattered. They should be no more. And a lot of times they're there because of those policies are or are not in place. PDF document. That's all it is. It's a Word doc saying this is what you got to do to get here. That's all.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to you guys for just having this unbelievably, delightful conversation. I have had goosebumps since the inkling of actually having this conversation. To see it to fruition is just amazing. I hope everyone feels that energy. And I hope everyone senses the urgency of race and design, and of how easy it is to start small and grow big, or just go for it and put all of your ducks in a basket and just go. I hope that from this conversation, and know from this conversation, that things will start to change little by little or big by big. And I can't thank you guys enough for this. So.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of Katie. Thank you guys for your time. Thank you all to those that are attending. We hope that you got some really just enjoyed the discussion and enjoyed the topic. But I also want to reiterate that this doesn't stop here. These hard discussions shouldn't end as soon as we close the webinar. We ask that you continue to go out and fight for the social justice that's owed, I guess, so to speak. So thank you all. And with that, if we don't have any more questions, then I'll end the webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay in touch.